Resident Evil almost never had its name. The game we know today as Resident Evil was never meant to carry that title. In Japan, it launched as Biohazard, a name that perfectly captured Capcom's vision of viral outbreaks and contamination spreading through confined spaces. But when the time came to bring the game westward, the team hit a wall. The name Biohazard was already trademarked, not once, but twice. A DOS game had claimed it first, and then a Brooklyn-based punk rock band locked it down. Faced with this roadblock, Capcom held an internal company-wide contest to generate a new name. Out of that brainstorming session came Resident Evil, a clever play on the mansion setting, where evil literally resided within. The name stuck, and the rest became survival horror history. Sweet Home laid the foundation. Before Resident Evil existed, Capcom released Sweet Home in 1989. It was based on a Japanese horror film of the same name and followed a film crew exploring a haunted mansion filled with ghosts and deadly traps. Sweet Home was never released outside Japan due to its graphic content, but it planted seeds that would bloom years later. Director Shinji Mikami cited it as a masterpiece and originally intended Resident Evil to be a full remake of Sweet Home. The mansion setting, the emphasis on puzzles over combat, the limited inventory, the use of scattered notes for storytelling, multiple endings, and even those tense door-opening loading screens. All of these elements were inherited directly from Sweet Home. As development progressed, Mikami realized the project could stand on its own, and Resident Evil was born as a spiritual successor rather than a remake, the first-person vision that never was. Resident Evil is famous for its fixed camera angles and tank controls, but the game was originally envisioned as a first-person shooter. Early in development, the team experimented with a first-person perspective, complete with a UI similar to Doom. Shinji Mikami wanted this badly, but the original PlayStation simply couldn't handle it. The hardware struggled to render environments smoothly from that viewpoint, forcing the team to pivot. It wasn't until Mikami encountered Alone in the Dark that he adopted the now iconic third-person perspective, with pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles. Ironically, 2 decades later, Resident Evil 7 would finally deliver that first-person vision Mikami had dreamed of back in the mid-90s, proving that some ideas are simply ahead of their time. The co-op mode that couldn't happen. When Resident Evil was shown off in 1995, early gameplay footage and screenshots revealed something surprising. Both Chris and Jill exploring Spencer Mansion together, fending off zombies side by side. Capcom was testing cooperative multiplayer, an ambitious feature for survival horror at the time. The idea was to let 2 players experience the terror together, but the PlayStation's hardware limitations killed the dream. Mikami himself admitted the co-op gameplay wasn't good enough, and the feature was scrapped entirely. It wouldn't be until Resident Evil 5 in 2009 that the series would finally embrace co-op gameplay, more than a decade after the original game's release. Dewey and Gelzer, the Missing Stars members. Not everyone made it into the final roster of Resident Evil. Early character designs included Dewey, a tall African-American man with a sense of humor meant to provide lighter moments in the game, and Gelzer, a hulking cyborg who would help the team with brute strength. Both were eventually replaced by Rebecca Chambers and Barry Burton. The shift made sense. Rebecca and Barry felt more grounded, more human, fitting the game's tone better than a wisecracking giant and a literal cyborg would have. Still, it's fascinating to imagine what Resident Evil might have felt like with those 2 on the team. The voice acting was a last-minute scramble. Resident Evil's notoriously campy voice acting wasn't planned, it was panic. Toward the end of development, Capcom realized the game was shipping to the West with only Japanese audio. Worried this would alienate potential customers, they scrambled to localize it. American actors were rushed to Japan to film the FMV sequences, and each actor was given only 2 takes per scene. The result? Legendary lines like, "You were almost a Jill sandwich," and "I hope this isn't Chris's blood." The hokey delivery wasn't intentional, but it became part of Resident Evil's charm, earning the game a spot in the 2008 Guinness World Records Gamers Edition for its corny B-movie script. Shinji Mikami worked alone for 6 months. The first Resident Evil started development in 1993 and launched globally in 1996. A long cycle for that era. What's most surprising is that Shinji Mikami worked on it by himself for the first 6 months before Capcom granted him a small team. That team slowly grew over the next 3 years, but the game's DNA was Mikami's vision through and through. His singular focus in those early months shaped everything: the tone, the pacing, the design philosophy. Resident Evil wasn't built by a committee. It was built by one man's obsession with survival and dread. The Game Boy Color port that almost happened. Resident Evil was ported to nearly every console imaginable, but one version never saw the light of day: the Game Boy Color port. The handheld version was reportedly 90% complete before Capcom pulled the plug. The company stated they weren't confident the product would make both consumers and Capcom happy. Later, an enthusiast managed to obtain the unfinished game, and it was released as a ROM online. Players can still experience this lost relic today through emulation, a strange footnote in the series' history. European mansions inspired the Spencer estate. The creepy Spencer mansion wasn't conjured from thin air. Tatsuya Minami, senior manager of product planning for Resident Evil, revealed that the team visited real European stately homes to obtain a strong background for the game. They needed something that felt both grand and unsettling, and European estates delivered. Minami admitted in interviews that he personally felt frightened visiting some of these homes. That unease bled directly into the game's atmosphere, turning hallways and sitting rooms into places where dread lingered in every corner. The instant success. Despite being a new IP with a risky premise, Resident Evil became an instant hit when it launched in 1996. Throughout that year and into 1997, it topped bestseller lists worldwide. The game sold 2.75 million copies on PS1 alone, cementing itself as not just a commercial success but a cultural phenomenon. It popularized the survival horror genre to the point where it became the standard, the template every horror game that followed had to measure itself against. Resident Evil 2's original vision, Resident Evil 1.5. What we know as Resident Evil 2 almost didn't exist. The original version, now referred to as Resident Evil 1.5, was around 70% complete before Shinji Mikami decided it was inadequate and scrapped it entirely. In that prototype, Claire Redfield didn't exist. Instead, the protagonist was Elza Walker, a college student and motorcycle enthusiast with no connection to Chris. The game had a different tone, different locations, and different story beats. In 2013, the prototype leaked online, and fans have since completed it into a playable state. It runs on emulators fairly well, giving us a glimpse of what might have been a parallel universe where Resident Evil 2 was a completely different game. Wesker's desk holds a secret photograph. In the original Resident Evil 2, there's a photograph hidden inside Wesker's desk at the Raccoon Police Department, but finding it requires absurd dedication. You have to check the desk 50 times in a row. After that 50th click, a roll of film appears with a picture of Rebecca Chambers wearing a basketball outfit. The remake simplified this Easter egg significantly. Now you only need to find the film labeled Hiding Place, develop it in the dark room, then return to Wesker's desk to reveal a drawer containing a new film called Rising Rookie. The photograph has been remastered, and Rebecca's pose is slightly more suggestive than the original. It's a small reward for the curious, a nod to fans who remember the first game. George Romero's Resident Evil connection and rejection. George A. Romero, the godfather of zombie horror, had close ties with Capcom and Resident Evil. He was chosen to direct an ad campaign for Biohazard 2 in Japan, creating a short commercial that leaned into his signature style. Later, Romero was brought on to write and direct the Resident Evil movie. He penned a script that stayed closer to the games, featuring characters like Chris, Jill, and the Spencer Mansion. But the studio rejected his vision, opting instead for Paul W.S. Anderson's approach, which diverged significantly from the source material. Romero's script was shelved, and Anderson's interpretation became the film series we know today, one that has grossed over $1 billion despite mixed critical reception. The development cycle of Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 spent 7 years in development, a cycle that would seem absurd if not for disasters like Duke Nukem Forever. What was happening behind closed doors? The answer: the team kept changing direction. At one point, RE4 involved demons and supernatural horror, but Mikami felt it didn't fit Resident Evil. That concept was recycled into Devil May Cry, which became another massive Capcom franchise. Another iteration featured a samurai and ninja theme, where zombies appeared from trapdoors and fake walls. That idea was spun off into the Onimusha series. Basically, Resident Evil 4 helped birth new franchises while struggling to find its own identity. When it finally released in 2005, it redefined third-person action horror and became one of the greatest games of all time. The hallucination version and the Hookman. One of the most infamous scrapped versions of Resident Evil 4 is known as the Hookman version. In this build, Leon infiltrated a castle filled with ghosts and supernatural elements, fighting enemies that felt more like a psychological horror film than a Resident Evil game. Footage released on the Biohazard 4 secret DVD showed off this version, and it was eerie, slow, and deeply unsettling. Scenario writer Yasuhisa Kawamura revealed he was inspired by the film Lost Souls, where the main character finds herself in a derelict building with a killer on the loose. While the Hookman version was scrapped for straying too far from Resident Evil's roots, many of its ideas were recycled into Haunting Ground, another Capcom survival horror game. The laser scene in the Resident Evil movie was practical. One of the most memorable moments in Paul W.S. Anderson's 2002 Resident Evil film is the laser corridor scene, where Umbrella Commandos are sliced into pieces by a security grid. The final shot of Colin Salmon's character getting diced into cubes was achieved through practical effects. The makeup team created a full-body mold of the actor, cut it into small cubes, and placed each cube on individual rods in front of a green screen. The rods were then broken apart during filming to simulate the character's gruesome death. It's a testament to how much work went into making that scene visceral and unforgettable. Claire's jacket references Queen. Chris Redfield's alternate costume jacket in the original Resident Evil reads, "Made in Heaven," a reference to Queen's final album of the same name. Claire's jacket in Resident Evil 2 has a similar design and also references that album, reading "Let Me Live," the third track on Made in Heaven. The trend continues in Resident Evil 0, where Billy Cohen's tattoo translates to "Mother Love," the album's fourth track. These aren't random choices. Someone on the development team was clearly a Queen fan. weaving subtle musical tributes throughout the series. The Mercenaries mode was inspired by The Running Man, Resident Evil 3. Nemesis introduced the Mercenaries minigame, a time-based survival challenge that became a series staple. Scenario writer Yasuhisa Kawamura revealed that the mode was inspired by The Running Man, one of his favorite movies. The concept of fighting for survival against overwhelming odds while the clock ticked down fit perfectly with Resident Evil 3's themes, and players loved it. Mercenaries mode would return in later games, evolving into a full-fledged competitive experience. Nemesis says stars for a reason. The Nemesis is one of the most terrifying enemies in the Resident Evil series, relentlessly hunting Jill Valentine throughout Resident Evil 3. His iconic growl, "Stars," isn't just for show. Nemesis was programmed by Umbrella to hunt down and eliminate all surviving members of the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, the elite police unit that uncovered Umbrella's crimes in the first game. That singular focus makes him more than just a monster. He's a weapon with a mission, and Jill is his target. The Dino Crisis Easter egg in Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, and Dino Crisis were both developed by Capcom and released on PlayStation in 1999, just months apart. The two games share many developers, and RE3 includes a cheeky Easter egg. Posters for Dino Crisis can be seen briefly during a cutscene. One poster advertises the game's release date, while another corresponds to the congratulations screen at the end of the game. Additionally, one of Jill's unlockable costumes was designed to resemble Regina, the protagonist of Dino Crisis. It's a playful nod between two horror games that share DNA. The bridge choice that changes the ending. In Resident Evil 3, there's a pivotal moment on a bridge between the park and the lab where Nemesis confronts Jill. The game gives you a choice: push Nemesis off the bridge or jump off yourself. Choosing to jump changes the rest of the game, altering scenes and the final ending. It's one of the earliest examples of player choice affecting narrative outcomes in the series, a mechanic that would become more prominent in later entries. Code Veronica was supposed to be Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil Code Veronica was originally intended to be the true Resident Evil 3, while the game we know as RE3 was meant to be a spin-off starring Jill. At the time, Capcom had multiple Resident Evil projects in development. Hideki Kamiya's Resident Evil 3, starring Hunk on a cruiser, Code Veronica on the Dreamcast, and a PlayStation game featuring Jill. Kamiya's version was canceled and retooled into Devil May Cry, so the Dreamcast game was intended to be RE2's true successor. However, the PlayStation game was promoted to numbered status instead, and Code Veronica lost its numeral despite being the more ambitious project. Alexia and Alfred, the Ashford twins. The Ashford twins, Alexia and Alfred, are central to Resident Evil, Code Veronica. They were created through Project Code Veronica, a cloning experiment using DNA from their ancestor, Veronica Ashford. Alexia was the true genius, graduating university at age 10 and becoming a chief researcher at Umbrella's Antarctic facility. Alfred, while intelligent, lived in her shadow and developed an obsessive devotion to her. When they discovered the truth about their origins, they captured their father, Alexander Ashford, and used him as a test subject for Alexia's newly created T. Veronica virus. The experiment failed horribly, mutating Alexander into the creature known as Nosferatu. Alexia then injected herself with the virus and entered cryogenic sleep for 15 years to allow the infection to stabilize. Alfred was tasked with waking her when the time came, but isolation drove him to madness, and he developed a split personality where he dressed and acted like his sister. The Baker family were good people once. The Baker family in Resident Evil 7 weren't always monsters. Before Eveline arrived, Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, and Zoe were a quiet, loving family living in Dulvey, Louisiana. They had a history of military service, and locals described them as kind, if somewhat reclusive. Everything changed in October 2014 when a shipwreck brought Eveline, a bioweapon capable of controlling minds through a fungal contaminant called the mold. Eveline infected the Bakers, seizing control of Jack, Marguerite, and Lucas, while Zoe somehow retained her free will. For 3 years, the Bakers became sadistic killers, abducting and murdering people under Eveline's influence. The tragedy of Resident Evil 7 is that the Bakers were victims, their humanity stripped away by something they never understood. Ethan Winters was dead the whole time. One of Resident Evil 7's most shocking revelations comes not in that game, but in Resident Evil Village. Ethan Winters, the protagonist of both games, was killed by Jack Baker early in RE7. He only survived because he was infected with Eveline's mold, which gave him regenerative abilities. Ethan's severed hand being stapled back on, his wounds healing impossibly fast. All of it was the mold keeping him alive. He wasn't human anymore, he was something else. This twist recontextualizes everything, and when Ethan finally learns the truth in Village, it's devastating. He's been walking through nightmares as a corpse held together by fungus, and his daughter Rose inherits those same mold-based powers. Lucas was never controlled. In Resident Evil 7, Lucas Baker seems just as infected and controlled as the rest of his family. But the truth is darker. Lucas was already a twisted individual before Eveline arrived. He'd been conducting cruel experiments on people long before the mold infected the family. When Eveline took control of the Bakers, Lucas secretly contacted the organization responsible for creating her, the Connections. They provided him with a serum that let him maintain his free will without Eveline knowing. Lucas used his freedom to set up elaborate death traps and torture victims for his own amusement, all while pretending to be under Eveline's control. He wasn't a victim. He was a willing participant in the horror. The kitchen demo was PT-level genius. Before Resident Evil 7 was officially revealed, Capcom released a VR demo called Kitchen that left players terrified and confused. The demo dropped you into a first-person perspective, tied to a chair in a grimy room while someone or something approached. It was visceral, claustrophobic, and deeply unsettling. At the time, no one knew it was connected to Resident Evil. The demo was later revealed to be an early test of RE7's first-person horror, and it worked brilliantly, building hype and fear in equal measure. The Megamycete connects RE7 and RE8. In Resident Evil Village, there's a hidden cave near the pond with the golden fish. Inside, players can find a laptop and the heart of the Megamycete, a massive fungal network connected to the mold from RE7. This discovery links the Baker incident to the events in the village, revealing that the mold isn't just a localized threat. It's part of a larger, ancient organism with roots stretching back centuries. The Megamycete stores memories and consciousness, making it a kind of organic database of everyone it's ever infected. It's a chilling concept that ties the series' recent entries together. Lady Dimitrescu's real-world inspiration. Lady Dimitrescu became a pop culture icon almost instantly when Resident Evil Village was revealed. Her towering height, vampiric elegance, and commanding presence captured imaginations worldwide. But her design wasn't pulled from classic vampire lore alone. The character draws inspiration from Elizabeth Bathory, an 18th century Hungarian noblewoman allegedly responsible for murdering and mutilating hundreds of children. Bathory's legend includes bathing in blood to maintain her youth, which cemented her as a vampire-like figure in folklore. There are also parallels to the Japanese urban legend of Hashaku-sama, a tall woman in a white dress and brimmed hat who preys on victims. Capcom blended these inspirations with the Morticia Addams elegance, creating a villain who felt both familiar and fresh. The real mansion shoot locations. Tatsuya Minami revealed that the mansions used in Resident Evil were based on real-world homes that creeped the development team out the most. They traveled to European stately homes to study architecture, lighting, and layout, picking locations that naturally felt unsettling. This grounded research gave the Spencer Mansion and later locations a tangible quality. They didn't just look scary, they felt like places that could exist, where real tragedies might have unfolded. The zapping system almost didn't happen. Resident Evil 2's zapping system, where Leon and Claire's scenarios intertwine and affect each other, was a risky design choice. Noboru Sugimura, the screenwriter, was initially opposed to it because he knew how much work it would be to weave together multiple narratives. But director Hideki Kamiya insisted, saying, "This is what I want to do in Resident Evil 2. Sugimura eventually conceded, and the result was one of the game's most celebrated features. The zapping system gave players 4 distinct playthroughs: Leon A, Claire B, Claire A, Leon B, each with unique story beats and encounters, significantly increasing replay value. The rocket launcher platform origin. The iconic train escape sequence at the end of Resident Evil 2 was one of the most ambitious set pieces in the game. In behind-the-scenes footage, production designer Richard Bridgeland explained the challenges. The original tracks for the train were several feet too deep, so the production team had to build hundreds of meters of platforms capable of supporting a 12-ton train. It was an engineering feat that made the final chase sequence feel visceral and real. Jill's letter to Kendo. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, after the Resident Evil 3 remake was announced, Capcom updated RE2 with a new letter from Jill Valentine addressed to Kendo. The letter, found on the front desk at Kendo's gun shop, reads, "It seems like you've got your reasons for staying put, so I'll trust you to take care of yourself. Still, if things get worse and your other arrangements don't work out, you know where to find me. I'll do everything I can." Finding this letter unlocks the Chasing Jill achievement, a small but meaningful connection between the two games. Nemesis' voice in the RE2 demo. When Capcom released a new demo for Resident Evil 2 to promote the RE3 remake, players discovered something terrifying. If you stand near the front gates of the Raccoon Police Department, you can hear a monstrous voice in the background shouting, "Stars." It's Nemesis, hunting Jill somewhere else in the city while Leon's story unfolds. The Easter egg was a chilling reminder that both games take place simultaneously, and the horror is happening on multiple fronts. Mr. Raccoon collectibles. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, there are 15 Mr. Raccoon figurines hidden throughout the game. These small, well-hidden statues can only be destroyed by shooting them, and some are exclusive to Leon's or Claire's scenarios. Finding and destroying all 15 unlocks the unbreakable combat knife, the only infinite weapon usable for an S+ rank. It's a collectible hunt that rewards thorough exploration, and some of the hiding spots are deviously clever. The mannequin enemy design philosophy. Masahiro Ito, the creature designer, revealed that the mannequin enemies in Resident Evil 2 were built from a simple but creepy idea. Legs are the part people notice first in storefront mannequins. By stripping away everything else and fusing two lower halves together, Ito created an enemy that reads instantly but feels deeply wrong. The creatures move with joints in the wrong places, and the breathy audio design makes them feel like props that woke up. Few enemies in the series feel so unnerving despite being relatively low tech in concept. Plant 43 almost didn't make the remake. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, the team almost skipped the Plant 43 enemies because, according to producer Kanda, it's really hard to make a plant monster in a more realistic atmosphere. The team debated for about a year before Kanda insisted it stay in. While some enemies like the giant moth, baby moths, evolved lickers, giant spiders, and crows didn't make the cut, Plant 43 survived, adding botanical horror to the mix. The fourth survivor and Tofu, completing Resident Evil 2 unlocks two standalone missions. The fourth survivor, where you play as the Umbrella mercenary hunk, and the Tofu survivor, where you control a giant block of tofu. Tofu was originally created to test hit detection during development, but the team liked him so much they kept him as a secret character. He's armed only with a combat knife and healing items, making his escape from the Raccoon City sewers an intense challenge. Tofu was planned to appear in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but he was scrapped late in development. Using a Game Shark, players can still access his unused character model in that game. Ada's sunglasses were almost canon. Ada Wong's sunglasses in Resident Evil 4 were almost a permanent part of her design. Concept art shows her wearing them in multiple scenarios, but the team decided to reserve them for specific cutscenes to emphasize her mysterious, spy-like persona. The sunglasses became iconic anyway, defining her cool, detached demeanor in a game filled with chaos. The Regenerador design process. The Regenerador enemies in Resident Evil 4 are among the creepiest in the series. These pale, heavily breathing creatures regenerate limbs almost instantly unless you destroy the parasites hidden inside their bodies using a thermal scope. The team designed them to be unnerving through sound as much as visuals. Their labored breathing and distorted laughter make every encounter tense. Destroying all the parasites and watching them collapse is deeply satisfying, a reward for overcoming that specific dread. The Ditman glitch and the glitchy charm. In the original Resident Evil 4, speedrunners discovered the Ditman glitch, named after its discoverer. By using the striker shotgun and switching weapons in a specific way, Leon's movement speed would increase drastically. It became a staple of speedruns. In the RE4 remake, Capcom paid homage to this glitch with an unlockable charm that increases Leon's movement speed by 8%, boosting not only his pace but also his dodge window. It's a nod to the community that kept the game alive for nearly 2 decades. The merchant's identity remains a mystery. The merchant in Resident Evil 4 has been selling Leon weapons, upgrades, and supplies since 2005, but his identity and motivations remain unknown. He appears in the most unlikely places: sewers, castles, remote islands, always ready to make a deal. Theories abound. Is he infected but immune? Is he an Umbrella agent? A neutral party exploiting chaos? Capcom has never given a definitive answer, and that mystery is part of his charm. Luis Serra's unused death scene in the original Resident Evil 4. If you shot Luis Serra too many times during gameplay, a special cutscene would trigger where Leon accidentally kills him, resulting in a game over. This feature was removed in the 2023 remake, where Luis is now invincible to friendly fire. It's a small change, but it shows how the remake prioritized smoother gameplay over punishing players for accidents. The Salazar Castle architecture. Many architectural elements in Salazar's castle were taken from real places. The room with the rocket launcher surrounded by glass features, a massive painting depicting famous Greek philosophers, the School of Athens by Italian Renaissance artist Raphael. In the bedroom where Leon first encounters Ada, there's Primavera by Botticelli. These aren't random art assets, they're deliberate references that ground the castle in history and culture, making it feel like a real place with centuries of legacy. The Chicago Sweeper and Killer 7. The Resident Evil 4 remake includes weapon references to other Capcom titles and Leon's namesake. The Chicago Sweeper is an SMG with an unlimited ammo upgrade, a nod to gangster-era weaponry. The Killer 7, named after one of Shinji Mikami's other works, is a powerful magnum. And the Matilda, a handgun, carries the name of the little girl adopted by a hitman in Leon, the Professional, the film Leon S. Kennedy is named after. The Master of Unlocking returns. One of Resident Evil's most famous lines is Barry Burton telling Jill, "You're the master of unlocking," before she heads into Spencer Mansion. The line became legendary for its awkward delivery. Almost 3 decades later, the Resident Evil 4 remake paid homage with an achievement trophy called Master of Unlocking, unlocked by picking a certain number of locks. It's a playful callback to the series' roots and a wink to longtime fans. Trophy names reference classic lines. The Resident Evil 4 remake's trophies are packed with references to the original game's one-liners. After defeating Mendez, you unlock Grilled Big Cheese, a callback to Luis calling Mendez the Big Cheese. Ramon Salazar's defeat earns you no thanks, bro, a direct quote from Leon in the 2005 version. Beating Verdugo gives you wave goodbye, right hand, referencing Leon questioning Ramon's ability to remove his right hand. These trophies are love letters to the original script, the Red 9 Hidden Treasure. The Red 9 handgun isn't a secret weapon in the traditional sense, but you can get it for free if you know where to look. In Chapter 4, once you have access to the boat, sail to the center of the lake where the shipwreck is located. Sail around it until you find the landing point, then head to the back of the ship to find a blue chest with the Red 9 inside. It's one of the most powerful handguns in the game, and finding it early gives you a significant advantage. If you miss it, you can still purchase it from the merchant later, but there's something satisfying about claiming it from the depths of the lake. The cabin fight is optional. In Resident Evil 4, after rescuing Ashley from the church, Leon and Ashley must survive a cabin siege where waves of ganados attack. What most players don't realize is that this fight has a timer. If you can hold out long enough without dying, the enemies will eventually stop coming and retreat. You don't have to kill them all, you just have to survive. This turns the encounter from a frantic battle into a tense game of endurance, rewarding defensive play over aggression. The typewriter sounds are nostalgic by design. The typewriter save system has been a Resident Evil staple since the beginning. The sound of keys clacking and the bell dinging when you save became synonymous with safety and progress. In later games, even as save systems modernized, Capcom kept the typewriter motif and sound effects because they're so deeply embedded in the series' identity. Hearing that sound triggers a Pavlovian response in longtime players. Relief, security, a moment to breathe before diving back into horror. Resident Evil Zero's partner, zapping system. Resident Evil Zero introduced a unique mechanic where you could switch between 2 characters, Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen, at any time. This partner zapping system let you solve puzzles by positioning characters in different areas, splitting up to cover more ground, or teaming up for combat. It was ambitious and added a layer of strategy, but it also made inventory management twice as complicated. The system was divisive among fans, with some loving the freedom and others finding it cumbersome. The pink herb that never was. In Resident Evil Zero, developers tinkered with a pink herb during development. Although it never made it into the final game, the pink herb still lives within the game's code. Players can access it through modding or cheat devices, but it doesn't do anything. We'll never know what the pink herb was supposed to do. Heal fully? Grant temporary invincibility? It remains one of the series' small mysteries. The Leech Conspiracy. Resident Evil Zero introduced the Queen Leech as its main antagonist, a creature that absorbed the memories and personality of Dr. James Marcus. The concept was bizarre even by Resident Evil standards, a sentient mass of leeches masquerading as a human. But it worked, creating an enemy that was both grotesque and tragic. The train setting amplified the claustrophobia, making every encounter with the leeches feel like a race against time. The hook shot was considered. During development of Resident Evil 4, the team considered giving Leon a hook shot mechanic similar to The Legend of Zelda. Leon would have been able to grapple to high points, swing across gaps, and reach previously inaccessible areas. The idea was scrapped because it didn't fit the game's tone and would have made level design too complicated. Still, imagining Leon ziplining across Salazar's castle is a fun mental image. The Chainsaw Sisters. The Bella sisters in Resident Evil 4 are two chainsaw-wielding enemies who appear in the castle. They're faster and more aggressive than the male chainsaw ganados encountered earlier. Their placement in tight corridors and confined spaces makes them some of the most dangerous regular enemies in the game. The sound of their chainsaws revving sends players into panic mode, and for good reason. One hit can mean instant death. Ashley's ballistics joke. In Resident Evil 4, if Leon examines a suit of armor while Ashley is nearby, she'll make a comment about preparing for tomorrow's ballistics. It's a cheeky double entendre that flew over many players' heads on their first playthrough. The remake toned down Ashley's more flirtatious lines, but the original leaned into the B-movie dialogue, making Leon and Ashley's banter feel like something out of an action thriller. The village chief's parasite reveal. The village chief, Vitores Mendez, has one of the most disturbing transformations in Resident Evil 4. When his upper body detaches from his lower half and a centipede-like plaga emerges, the fight becomes a chaotic scramble across multiple floors. The design sells the idea that the plagas aren't just parasites, they're replacing their hosts entirely, turning humans into shells for alien biology. The island section's sudden shift. Resident Evil 4's island section marked a tonal shift that divided players. After the atmospheric village and Gothic castle, the militarized island with its machine guns, searchlights, and sci-fi facility felt like a different game. Some loved the escalation, the ramp up in firepower and intensity. Others felt it lost the survival horror roots in favor of action. Either way, it showed Capcom was willing to take risks, pushing the series into new territory. The Garradors are blind. The Garradors in Resident Evil 4 are blind, relying on sound to hunt Leon. Their back-mounted plagas are their weak points, meaning you have to bait them into charging, dodge at the last second, then attack from behind. They're essentially a boss encounter disguised as a regular enemy, and fighting them in tight arenas like the castle prison cells is nerve-wracking. The sound design, the scraping claws, the guttural breathing, makes every encounter memorable. The Water Room Death Trap. In the Resident Evil 4 remake, one of the castle's deadliest traps is the water room, where spiked walls close in while zealots attack. The original game had a similar trap, but the remake tightened the timing and added more enemies, making it a frantic race against the clock. Players have to manage combat, solve the puzzle, and escape before being crushed, all while maintaining composure. It's pure survival horror. Ashley's absence in the remake's later sections. In the Resident Evil 4 remake, Ashley's absence during certain sections gives Leon breathing room to explore dangerous areas alone. The team balanced escort mechanics carefully, making Ashley more capable when she's present while ensuring Leon's solo moments felt distinct. It's a design choice that addresses one of the original game's biggest complaints: Ashley's AI getting in the way during combat. The Merchant's firing range. The Merchant offers Leon access to a firing range where you can test weapons and earn special charms by hitting targets. These charms attach to Leon's attaché case and provide gameplay bonuses like increased health, faster reload speeds, or better critical hit rates. It's a clever way to add light progression mechanics without breaking the game's survival horror tone. The Clockwork Castellans. Scattered throughout the Resident Evil 4 remake are 16 small Clockwork Castellan statues that can be destroyed. Finding and destroying all of them unlocks the primal knife, a knife with the exclusive perk Indestructible, granting unlimited durability. It's a reward for exploration and observation, encouraging players to search every corner of every area. The egg-throwing request. One of the Stranger Merchant requests in the Resident Evil 4 remake asks Leon to deface Salazar's portrait in the throne room. The solution? Throw an egg at it. Players can either use a gold egg found in a nearby treasure box or wait for one of the chickens in the room to lay an egg. It's absurd, it's funny, and it's perfectly Resident Evil 4. The Giant Lake Creature. Del Lago, the massive aquatic creature in Resident Evil 4, is one of the series' most memorable boss fights. The entire battle takes place in a boat, with Leon harpooning the creature while it drags him across the lake. The tension comes from managing distance, aiming accurately, and avoiding obstacles. The fight feels like a scene from Jaws, and it's one of the few boss encounters in the series that happens entirely in water. The Right-Hand Man. Verdugo, Ramon Salazar's right hand, is one of Resident Evil 4's toughest enemies. Fast, aggressive, and almost invulnerable, Verdugo can only be weakened by liquid nitrogen, and even then, it's a temporary solution. The fight takes place in a cramped underground area while waiting for an elevator, adding time pressure to an already intense encounter. Most players opt to avoid Verdugo rather than kill him, conserving resources for the battles ahead. The mines in U3. The U3 boss in the island's mines is one of Resident Evil 4's most grotesque creatures. It has multiple weak points, shifts between 2 legs and 4 legs, and relentlessly pursues Leon through the mine tunnels. The fight is chaotic, with environmental hazards and tight spaces making every move dangerous. It's a highlight of the island section, a pure test of reflexes and resource management. The Final Countdown. The final escape sequence in Resident Evil 4 gives Leon and Ashley a tight time limit to reach the jet ski and escape the island before it explodes. This ticking clock adds urgency to every encounter, forcing players to decide when to fight and when to run. It's a classic action movie ending, and it works because the game has earned that bombastic payoff through hours of tension. Separate Ways and Ada's Perspective. The Separate Ways. DLC in Resident Evil 4 lets players experience the game from Ada Wong's perspective, revealing her involvement in the events and her connection to Albert Wesker. Separate Ways fills in narrative gaps, showing what Ada was doing while Leon fought through the village, castle, and island. Her story runs parallel to Leon's, and certain moments overlap, giving players a fuller picture of the conspiracy at play. The Infinite Rocket Launcher. Completing Resident Evil 4 unlocks the Infinite Rocket Launcher, a weapon that trivializes most encounters, but is deeply satisfying to use. It costs a fortune to buy from the merchant, but it's worth every peseta. Watching Leon obliterate enemies with unlimited rockets never gets old, and it rewards players who've mastered the game by letting them have fun on subsequent playthroughs. The Professional Difficulties Hand Cannon. In the Resident Evil 4 remake, beating Professional difficulty without using bonus weapons unlocks the hand cannon, a magnum with an exclusive unlimited ammo upgrade. It's the ultimate reward for skilled players, a badge of honor that says you conquered the game's hardest mode. The hand cannon is absurdly powerful, one-shotting most enemies and making even bosses trivial. The Chicago Sweeper's unlimited ammo. The Chicago Sweeper is an SMG unlocked by beating Professional mode with an A rank. Its exclusive upgrade grants unlimited ammo, turning it into a bullet hose that shreds enemies. It's not subtle, it's not strategic, it's pure, unadulterated firepower, and it's glorious. The Chicago Sweeper is Capcom rewarding mastery with chaos. The Outbreak games were ahead of their time. Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak File Number 2 were designed as co-op multiplayer games with online elements released on the PlayStation 2. The concept was ambitious. Survive Raccoon City's outbreak with other players, each controlling different characters with unique abilities. But the PS2's online infrastructure was limited, and most players experienced the games offline. The Outbreak titles never achieved the same success as the mainline series, but they were pioneers, attempting online survival horror years before it became mainstream. The Sewer Gators in RE7. The Sewer Gators crew in Resident Evil 7 were the latest victims of the Baker family before Ethan arrived. They were a team of 3 men working for an internet series investigating haunted houses across America. Over 2 years, they produced 16 episodes, exploring allegedly paranormal locations. Their final episode led them to the Dulvey Haunted House, the Baker family's guest house. None survived. Clancy, the cameraman, had the worst fate, appearing in multiple DLC scenarios where his torture and eventual death are shown from his perspective. The Bedroom DLC. Resident Evil 7's Bedroom DLC is one of the most tense scenarios in the series. You play as Clancy, confined to a bedroom and watched over by Marguerite Baker. Every time she leaves, you have a limited window to explore, solve puzzles, and gather items while avoiding detection. If Marguerite catches you out of bed, it's game over. The scenario is a masterclass in environmental puzzle design and stealth horror, where the simplest actions carry enormous risk. The 21 card game. Another Resident Evil 7 DLC scenario forces Clancy to play a rigged card game with Lucas Baker. The game is literally life or death. Lose, and you're injected with poison. Win, and you might escape. The scenario subverts expectations by focusing entirely on a card game rather than combat or exploration, showing the series' willingness to experiment with different horror scenarios. The Happy Birthday Trap. Lucas Baker's Happy Birthday Trap in Resident Evil 7 is a twisted puzzle box where Clancy must navigate a room filled with candles, sprinklers, and explosive wax. Every mistake brings him closer to being burned alive or blown up. The puzzle requires careful observation and precise timing, and watching the Happy Birthday VHS tape before attempting it yourself is both horrifying and helpful. It's one of the cruelest traps in the series, a testament to Lucas's sadism. The Daughters DLC. The Daughters DLC shows the Baker family before their infection, depicting Zoe's perspective on the night everything went wrong. It's tragic watching a normal family arguing over dinner, showing small kindnesses, slowly succumb to Eveline's influence. The DLC humanizes the Bakers, making the main game's horror hit harder because you know what they lost. End of Zoe and Joe Baker. The End of Zoe DLC introduces Joe Baker, Jack's brother, who lived in the swamps and avoided infection. When he finds Zoe calcified and dying, he sets out to cure her, fighting through molded with his bare hands. Joe is a different kind of protagonist for Resident Evil, a rugged outdoorsman who punches monsters to death rather than shooting them. The DLC is wild, campy, and surprisingly emotional, ending with Zoe's cure and Ethan contacting her to fulfill his promise. Not a Hero and Chris Redfield's return. Not a Hero, the free DLC for Resident Evil 7, follows Chris Redfield as he pursues Lucas Baker through the salt mines. Chris is working with Blue Umbrella, the reformed version of the corporation, which raises questions about his allegiances. The DLC provides closure to Lucas's storyline while setting up narrative threads for Resident Evil Village. Seeing Chris in action again, older and more grizzled, reminded fans why he's been a series icon for decades. The RE Engine debut. Resident Evil 7 was the first full game to use Capcom's in-house RE Engine, a technology that would become the foundation for the series' future. The engine allowed for photorealistic graphics, smooth performance, and flexible development pipelines. It powered RE7, RE2 Remake, RE3 Remake, RE8, and RE4 Remake, proving its versatility across different gameplay styles and tones. VR mode in RE7. Resident Evil 7 was one of the first major ALA games to offer full VR support on PlayStation VR. Playing the game in VR transformed the experience, making the Baker house feel oppressively real. Every shadow, every creaking floorboard, every encounter with Jack or Marguerite became viscerally terrifying. VR elevated RE7 from a great horror game to an unforgettable experience. The molded R Mutamecete zombies. The molded in Resident Evil 7 aren't traditional zombies. They're superorganisms formed from countless mycelia fungal threads controlled by the mold. They're not people who've been infected. They're constructs created by the mold itself, given form and purpose. This distinction makes them more alien than previous Resident Evil enemies, reinforcing the idea that Eveline's power is fundamentally different from the viruses that came before. The guest house is a misdirection. Resident Evil 7 opens in the guest house, where Ethan finds Mia and fights her in the basement. The entire sequence feels like it could be the whole game, escaping this one building. Then Jack knocks Ethan out, and the game reveals the main house, the old house, the testing area, and the shipwreck. That opening misdirection sets the tone. You never know how deep the horror goes until you're already trapped inside it. The grandma is Eveline. Throughout Resident Evil 7, an old woman in a wheelchair watches Ethan from various rooms. She never speaks, never moves aggressively, just watches. Most players assume she's Grandma Baker, another family member trapped in the nightmare. The truth is far stranger. She's Eveline. Her rapid aging, accelerated by the mold's instability, has turned the 10-year-old bioweapon into an elderly woman. She's been there all along, observing, manipulating, ensuring her family stays together. The serum choice. Near the end of Resident Evil 7, Ethan must choose between curing Mia or Zoe with the limited serum available. Choosing Mia leads to the canon ending, where Ethan and Mia escape together. Choosing Zoe results in a darker path. Zoe calcifies and dies in the boat, and Ethan must face Mia one final time in the shipwreck. The choice is brutal, forcing players to decide who deserves to be saved. The mutated Jack fight. The final confrontation with Jack Baker, after he's fully mutated into a grotesque mass of eyes and limbs, is Resident Evil 7's most visually disturbing boss fight. The fight takes place in a tight, claustrophobic arena, and Jack's new form is almost alien in its wrongness. It's a fitting end for a character who's been relentlessly pursuing Ethan, a final transformation that strips away any remaining humanity. Eveline's final form. When Ethan injects Eveline with the toxin, she mutates into a massive, monstrous form, a writhing mass of fungal matter, tentacles, and distorted faces. The fight is chaotic, overwhelming, and would be nearly impossible without the Albert 01 weapon dropped by the Blue Umbrella helicopter. Eveline's transformation reflects her instability, her desperation to cling to the family she's built even as it collapses around her. The Winters relocation. Between Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil Village, Ethan and Mia were relocated to Eastern Europe under BSAA protection. Chris Redfield was personally involved in their relocation, suggesting a deeper connection than the games initially reveal. The move was meant to give them a fresh start, away from the trauma of Louisiana. Instead, it put them directly in the path of Mother Miranda and the village's horrors. Mother Miranda's centuries-long grief. Mother Miranda, the central antagonist of Resident Evil Village, has been alive for centuries, sustained by the megamycete. Her daughter, Eva, died from the Spanish flu in 1919, and Miranda's grief drove her to experiment with the mold. Seeking a way to resurrect Eva, she created the Four Lords, infected the village, and manipulated countless lives, all in pursuit of the perfect vessel for her daughter's consciousness. When she discovered Rose Winters, a child born with mold powers, Miranda saw her chance and orchestrated Rose's kidnapping. The Four Lords and their domains. Resident Evil Village's Four Lords each control a domain and represent different horror archetypes. Lady Dimitrescu rules the castle, embodying gothic vampire horror. Donna Beneviento and her doll Angie haunt the creepy dollhouse, channeling psychological terror. Salvatore Moreau lurks in the reservoir, a grotesque aquatic monster evoking creature feature horror. Carl Heisenberg commands the factory, blending industrial nightmare and mad scientist tropes. Each area feels distinct, offering variety in tone and gameplay. The baby boss in House Beneviento. The House Beneviento sequence in Resident Evil Village is pure psychological horror. Stripped of weapons and forced to navigate a dark, silent house, players encounter the baby, a massive, grotesque fetus that crawls through the halls, crying and laughing. It's one of the most unsettling moments in the series, relying entirely on atmosphere and sound design rather than combat. Heisenberg's Rebellion. Carl Heisenberg is the only one of the Four Lords actively rebelling against Mother Miranda. He wants to use Ethan as a weapon against her, recognizing that Ethan's unique biology makes him valuable. Heisenberg's factory is filled with soldats, cybernetic abominations created from corpses and machinery. His vision of overthrowing Miranda through industrial warfare makes him a fascinating antagonist, one who sees Ethan as an ally rather than just prey. The Lycans are failed experiments. The Lycans prowling the village aren't werewolves in the traditional sense. They're failed Kadu experiments. Mother Miranda infected villagers with the Kadu parasite, hoping to create a suitable vessel for Eva. Most mutated into Lycans, mindless beasts driven by hunger and aggression. The few who adapted became the Four Lords, but the cost was their humanity. The Stronghold and Urias. Urias, the hammer-wielding Lycan boss, appears multiple times throughout Resident Evil Village, stalking Ethan through the village and the Stronghold. He's larger, smarter, and far more dangerous than regular Lycans, acting as a recurring threat similar to Nemesis or Mr. X. His final encounter in the Stronghold is intense, a culmination of all the times he's hunted Ethan. Chris's section and the BSAA reveal. Late in Resident Evil Village, players control Chris Redfield as he leads an assault on Miranda's ceremony site. This section shifts the gameplay from survival horror to tactical action, with Chris commanding a squad and using military-grade weapons. The sequence also reveals that the BSAA has been using bioweapons, a shocking corruption of the organization meant to fight bioterrorism. This twist sets up future conflicts in the series. Ethan's sacrifice. The ending of Resident Evil Village reveals that Ethan has been dying since Miranda ripped out his heart. The mold kept him alive, but his body is breaking down. In the final moments, Ethan triggers an explosion to destroy the Megamycete and Miranda, sacrificing himself to save Rose and Mia. His last words, "Goodbye, Rosemary," and his final vision of Rose as a baby are heartbreaking, cementing Ethan as one of the series' most tragic heroes. The epilogue and teenage Rose. The Shadows of Rose DLC, set 16 years after Village, follows a teenage Rose struggling with her mold powers and social isolation. She enters the Megamycete realm, seeking answers, and encounters Eveline, who's jealous of Rose's life and wants to kill her. Throughout the DLC, Ethan appears as golden lettering, guiding Rose. In the final confrontation, he takes physical form to help her fight Eveline, though his face remains hidden. The DLC ends with Rose visiting Ethan's grave on his birthday, expressing gratitude for his sacrifice before heading off with an unnamed organization, likely the BSAA or Blue Umbrella. The Duke's true nature, the Duke, the mysterious merchant in Resident Evil Village, remains an enigma. He appears everywhere, even in impossible locations, and seems to know more than he lets on. Fans have theorized he's connected to the Megamycete or is perhaps another experiment of Miranda's. Capcom has never confirmed his origins, leaving the Duke as one of the village's unsolved mysteries. The series' enduring legacy. Resident Evil has been terrifying players for nearly 3 decades, spawning over 20 mainline and spin-off games, multiple film adaptations, animated series, novels, and comics. It popularized survival horror, defined third-person action gameplay with RE4, and successfully reinvented itself with first-person horror in RE7. The series has sold over 150 million copies worldwide, making it one of Capcom's most successful franchises. From Spencer Mansion to the Dulvey Swamp, from Raccoon City to a remote European village, Resident Evil has taken us to nightmares we'll never forget. And as long as Capcom keeps building new horrors, we'll keep returning, flashlight in hand, limited ammo in our inventory, wondering what fresh hell waits around the next corner. The Crimson Head mechanic was revolutionary. The Resident Evil remake on GameCube introduced Crimson Heads, zombies that would revive faster, stronger, and more aggressive if you didn't burn their bodies or decapitate them. This mechanic forced players to make resource management decisions. Spend a precious fuel canister now, or risk facing a deadlier enemy later. It was a brilliant evolution of the series formula, adding tension to every zombie encounter. Players had to mentally map which bodies they'd burned and which rooms were still dangerous. The Crimson Heads turned the mansion into a constantly evolving threat rather than a static environment. Lisa Trevor's tragic story. Lisa Trevor is one of the most heartbreaking characters in Resident Evil lore. She was kidnapped as a child and used as a test subject by Umbrella for decades, subjected to every virus and parasite they developed. The experiments left her horrifically mutated but unable to die. She wore the faces of her victims as masks, searching desperately for her mother, who had also been experimented on and killed years earlier. Lisa's cabin in the woods and her appearances throughout the remake add layers of tragedy to the Spencer Mansion's horror. She's not evil, she's a victim, and her immortality is a curse. The defense items changed survival. The Resident Evil remake introduced defense items, daggers, flash grenades, and stun guns that trigger during grabs, giving players a last-second chance to escape. This seemingly small addition fundamentally changed how players approach combat. Instead of avoiding all damage or dying, you had a safety net, but using it meant losing that item permanently. The decision paralysis, save the defense item for later or use it now, became part of the psychological horror. Invisible enemy mode requires mastery. Unlocking Resident Evil Remake's invisible enemy mode requires beating the game with both Chris and Jill. In this mode, every enemy in the game is completely invisible. You can only detect them by sound, damage indicators, and environmental clues. Completing this mode unlocks a heartfelt letter from Shinji Mikami himself, thanking players for their dedication. The letter isn't just a congratulations, it's a genuine expression of gratitude from the creator to those who pushed the game to its limits. The Moonlight Sonata puzzle, one of Resident Evil's most famous puzzles, requires playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on a piano to unlock a secret passage. The puzzle is simple, match the sheet music to the keys, but it became iconic because it felt elegant, almost refined, a moment of classical beauty before the horror resumed. In the remake, playing it incorrectly triggers a booby trap, punishing players who try to brute force the puzzle. Forrest Spayer's alternate fate. In the Resident Evil remake, if you're fast enough, you can save Forrest from being pecked to death by crows. Rush to the cabin balcony quickly, and you'll find Forrest alive but wounded. He gives you his grenade launcher before dying from his injuries. It's a small mercy in a game filled with unavoidable deaths, and it rewards players who know the mansion's layout well enough to reach him in time. The real survival mode. After completing the Resident Evil remakes Once Again mode, players unlock real survival difficulty. This mode is brutally hard. Item boxes are no longer linked, meaning items placed in one box can only be retrieved from that specific box. Auto-aim is disabled, and the game is locked to hard difficulty. It's a nightmare mode designed for veterans, turning inventory management into an intricate puzzle where every decision matters exponentially more. The fuel canteen is limited. In the Resident Evil remake, fuel for burning zombie bodies is finite. There aren't enough canisters to burn every zombie you kill, forcing you to choose strategically which corpses to eliminate and which to risk reviving as Crimson Heads. This resource scarcity creates anxiety that lingers throughout the entire playthrough. You're never sure if you made the right choices until it's too late. Mr. X's original design. Mr. X, the tyrant that stalks players in Resident Evil 2, was originally designed to be even more imposing. Early concept art shows him with more visible mutations, exposed flesh, and a more grotesque appearance. The team scaled back his design to make him more unsettling through his humanoid appearance and deliberate movements. The fedora and trench coat make him look like a mobster or government agent, which is somehow more disturbing than if he looked like a typical monster. The fixed camera angles were inspired by film. Resident Evil's fixed camera angles weren't just a technical limitation, they were an artistic choice inspired by horror films. Shinji Mikami studied classic horror and thriller movies, noting how directors like Alfred Hitchcock used camera placement to control what the audience could see, building suspense through framing. By applying cinematic camera techniques to gameplay, Mikami created tension through what players couldn't see, making every doorway and corner a potential threat. The knife only runs. Beating Resident Evil games using only the knife has become a badge of honor among speedrunners and challenge players. These runs require intimate knowledge of enemy patterns, perfect positioning, and resource management for healing items. The knife-only category has produced some of the most impressive displays of skill in the community, with the runners taking down tyrants, nemesis, and even final bosses using nothing but a blade. Jill's sandwich became gaming legend. Barry Burton's line, "You were almost a Jill sandwich when saving Jill from a ceiling trap," is one of gaming's most memed quotes. The awkward phrasing and delivery made it instantly quotable. Decades later, the Resident Evil Uprising mobile game referenced it with a hidden recipe for a Jill sandwich on a post-it note in the police department. The line transcended the game, becoming shorthand for Resident Evil's campy charm. The STARS office safe contains Chris's diary. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, the STARS office safe doesn't just contain a weapon upgrade. There's also a document revealing Chris Redfield's whereabouts. The memo explains Chris went to Europe to investigate Umbrella's headquarters, setting up the events of Resident Evil, Code Veronica. These small documents scattered throughout the games create connective tissue between entries, making the series feel like a cohesive universe. Ada's hook shot in RE4. In Resident Evil 4, Ada Wong uses a grappling hook shot throughout her campaign, swinging across gaps and reaching high ledges. This tool changes how her sections play, allowing for more vertical exploration and faster traversal. The hook shot was considered for Leon, but ultimately reserved for Ada, emphasizing her role as the more agile, infiltration-focused character compared to Leon's straightforward combat approach. The Regenerador's breathing is distorted human sounds. Sound designer Shusaku Uchiyama revealed that the Regenerador's unsettling breathing and laughter were created by heavily distorting and layering human vocal recordings. The result sounds almost human but wrong, activating that uncanny valley response in players' brains. Every encounter with Regeneradors is accompanied by their labored, wheezing breaths, which grow louder as they approach, creating dread through audio alone. The village opening is one continuous sequence. Resident Evil 4's village opening, where Leon fights off waves of Ganados until the church bell rings, is a masterclass in pacing. The sequence can last anywhere from a few minutes to much longer depending on player skill and aggression. It's designed to feel overwhelming, training players to understand that sometimes retreat is the better option. The bell ringing and all enemies suddenly leaving is both relief and confusion. setting up the mystery of the Plaga's hive mind control. Ashley's armor makes her invincible. In Resident Evil 4, players can unlock a suit of armor for Ashley that makes her completely invincible. She can't be grabbed, can't take damage, and becomes the world's tankiest presidential daughter. The trade-off? She's extremely heavy, so Leon can't catch her when she jumps down from heights, and carrying her slows him to a crawl. It's a hilarious solution to escort mission complaints, turning Ashley into an unstoppable metal waddling force. The attaché case Tetris minigame. Managing Leon's attaché case in Resident Evil 4 became its own minigame. Players spent considerable time arranging weapons, ammo, healing items, and treasures like a deadly game of Tetris. The satisfaction of perfectly organizing your inventory became part of the gameplay loop. The remake expanded this with charms that provide bonuses, adding another layer to the case management metagame. The boulder punching scene. Resident Evil 5 features a scene where Chris Redfield literally punches a massive boulder to move it out of the way. The moment became instantly memed, embodying how the series had shifted from survival horror to action. Players either loved it for its absurd machismo or hated it for straying too far from the series' roots. Either way, Chris punching the boulder became gaming shorthand for over-the-top action. Shiva's AI problems. Resident Evil 5's co-op partner became notorious for poor AI behavior when playing solo. She'd waste ammo, use healing items at inopportune times, and occasionally stand in your line of fire. Playing with a human partner solved these issues, but solo players had to constantly manage Shiva's inventory and positioning, which broke immersion and created frustration. The Lost in Nightmares DLC. Resident Evil 5's Lost in Nightmares DLC is a love letter to the original game. Chris and Jill infiltrate a mansion clearly modeled after Spencer Mansion, complete with fixed camera angles if you check the main door 3 times. The DLC strips away RE5's action focus, returning to puzzle solving and atmosphere. It's a demonstration that the classic formula still works, and many fans wish the entire game had followed this approach. Wesker's powers kept escalating. Albert Wesker's powers became increasingly superhuman throughout the series. Starting as a seeming traitor in RE1, he returned in Code Veronica with incredible speed and strength. By RE5, he could dodge bullets, perform Matrix-style moves, and withstand damage that would kill anything else. His final form in RE5 mutated into a massive, tentacled monster after overdosing on Ouroboros, ending one of the series' longest-running villains in spectacular fashion. The boulder at the end of RE5 was foreshadowed. Earlier in Resident Evil 5, there's a moment where Chris and Sheva must move a large stone blocking their path. Chris strains significantly to budge it. By the end, he's punching a much larger boulder with ease, showing how the Las Plagas infection and injections he received enhanced his strength. It's subtle foreshadowing that explains somewhat the infamous boulder scene, though it remains gloriously ridiculous. Jake Muller is Wesker's son. Resident Evil 6 introduced Jake Muller, Albert Wesker's illegitimate son. Jake inherited his father's enhanced genetics, making his blood valuable for creating a vaccine against the C virus. The character was divisive. Some appreciated the personal stakes of Wesker's legacy continuing. Others felt it was an unnecessary soap opera twist. Jake's relationship with Sherry Birkin created interesting parallels, as both are children of people responsible for bioterror incidents. Leon's campaign in RE6 feels most like classic RE. Resident Evil 6 featured 4 intersecting campaigns with different gameplay styles. Leon's campaign, set in Tall Oaks and Lanxiang, felt closest to survival horror. with zombies, dark corridors, and puzzle elements. It was criticized for being too action-focused compared to older entries, but praised for being the best part of RE6. The game's attempt to please everyone by offering multiple gameplay styles ended up diluting what made each approach effective. The RE6 airplane crash. Leon's campaign in Resident Evil 6 opens with a zombie outbreak on an airplane, leading to a spectacular crash sequence. The entire opening is a roller coaster of quick-time events, explosions, and Leon fighting zombies mid-flight. It sets the tone for RE6's bombastic, summer blockbuster approach to horror, prioritizing spectacle over slow burn dread. The prelude to the fall. Resident Evil 6 included a prequel chapter called Prelude to the Fall that came with special editions. It followed BSAA agent codenamed Jay's mission, providing context for later events. The chapter was eventually made available to all players as DLC, but its initial special edition exclusivity frustrated fans who wanted the complete story. Revelations returned to the ship. Resident Evil Revelations brought the series back to its roots by setting most of the action aboard a cruise ship, the Queen Zenobia. The confined, labyrinthine setting recalled the Spencer Mansion, with limited resources and emphasis on exploration. Originally released on 3DS, the game proved that classic Resident Evil formula still had appeal, influencing Capcom's decision to return to survival horror with RE7. The raid mode became a staple. Resident Evil Revelations introduced raid mode, a mission-based co-op experience where players fight through stages with randomized enemy placements and weapon drops. It became so popular that Revelations 2 expanded it significantly, and elements of its structure influenced Resident Evil Resistance and the RE Village Mercenaries mode. Raid mode proved players wanted replayable, arcade-style content alongside the story campaigns. Revelations 2's episodic structure. Resident Evil Revelations 2 experimented with episodic releases, launching 4 episodes over consecutive weeks. Each episode ended on a cliffhanger, mimicking television series structure. The approach was divisive. Some enjoyed the weekly anticipation, others preferred waiting for the complete package. The experiment hasn't been repeated in the series, suggesting Capcom decided against the episodic model for future entries. Barry Burton's return. Resident Evil Revelations 2 brought back Barry Burton as a playable protagonist for the first time since the original game, not counting remakes and spin-offs. Players finally got to control the man behind Jill's sandwich, seeing an older, more weathered Barry searching for his daughter Moira. His campaign was praised for giving a beloved character a proper spotlight after decades of cameos and references. Moira's fear of guns. Barry's daughter, Moira Burton, suffers from a fear of guns after accidentally shooting her sister as a child. Throughout Revelations 2, she refuses to use firearms, relying instead on a crowbar and flashlight. This character trait creates interesting co-op dynamics, as her partner Claire handles most combat while Moira provides support. By the end, Moira's character arc involves confronting this fear in a pivotal moment. The good and bad endings in Revelations 2. Resident Evil Revelations 2 has multiple endings determined by player actions during specific moments. In the climax, whether Moira overcomes her fear and acts determines which ending you receive, the good ending where everyone survives, or the bad ending with tragic consequences. These branching paths add replayability and make player choices feel meaningful. The Tyrant Evolution. The Tyrant series of bioweapons evolved throughout Resident Evil, starting with the T-002 in the original game. Later models became more refined and controllable. The T-103 series, Mr. X could pass for human when wearing limiters. The TALOS in RE3 was a failed super tyrant covered in armor. Each iteration shows Umbrella's attempts to perfect the ultimate bioweapon, with diminishing returns as ethics cease to matter. The Hunter design philosophy. Hunters were designed to be Umbrella's answer to highly mobile, intelligent soldiers. Combining reptilian DNA with human genetic material, hunters are fast, deadly, and capable of decapitating victims with a single leap. Different hunter variants appear throughout the series: gammas in sewers, betas in outdoor environments, each adapted to specific terrains. They remain some of the most dangerous regular enemies because they can kill in one hit. The Licker's exposed brain. Lickers are zombies that have undergone further mutation, developing exposed brains, elongated claws, and enhanced agility. They're blind, hunting by sound alone, which creates tense stealth scenarios. The iconic shot of a licker crawling across a window or ceiling has become synonymous with Resident Evil 2, appearing in both the original and remake. Their design is viscerally disturbing: flayed skin, visible muscle tissue, a brain pulsing with each movement. Cerberus dogs are Dobermans. The Cerberus enemies, zombie dogs, are Doberman pinschers infected with the T-virus. Their jump-through window introduction in the original Resident Evil is one of gaming's most famous scares. These dogs are fast, attack in packs, and their erratic movements make them difficult to hit. Later games introduced different infected dog breeds, but the skinless, rotting Dobermans remain the iconic image. Ivy creatures were human-plant hybrids. The Plant 43 creatures, often called Ivies, in Resident Evil are humans mutated by a plant-based virus strain. They're ambulatory, carnivorous plants with human bodies as the base, capable of spitting acid and moving surprisingly fast. Their presence in the games is usually limited, appearing primarily in labs and greenhouses where the experiments took place. They represent Umbrella's willingness to experiment with any biological matter. The G virus creates unique mutations. Unlike the T virus, which creates similar zombies, the G virus generates unique mutations based on the host's DNA. William Birkin's transformation through multiple G stages showcases this. Each form is progressively more monstrous and less human. The G virus also allows hosts to reproduce by implanting embryos, seen with Birkin attempting to impregnate victims. It's arguably more dangerous than the T virus because it's unpredictable. Sherry Birkin's immunity, after being infected with a G embryo and cured in Resident Evil 2, Sherry Birkin retained trace amounts of G virus in her system, making her immune to most biological weapons. This became a plot point in RE6, where organizations wanted to weaponize her immunity. Sherry joined the DSO Division of Security Operations as an agent, using her unique biology as both protection and leverage. The Las Plagas aren't viruses. The parasites in Resident Evil 4 represent a shift from viruses to biological weapons. Las Plagas are ancient parasites sealed beneath Salazar's castle, awakened by the cult Los Illuminados. Unlike T-virus zombies, Plagas infected hosts retain intelligence and can follow orders, making them far more dangerous tactically. The Plagas can also mutate hosts in various ways, sprouting tentacles, growing claws, even bursting from the host's body as independent creatures. The Control Plaga variant. Ramon Salazar and other high-ranking cult members were infected with Control Plagas, variants that allowed Sadler to directly command them. These parasites granted enhanced abilities without the grotesque physical mutations regular plagas caused. It's why Salazar retains his appearance and intelligence throughout RE4 until his final boss transformation, where the plaga fully takes over. The Ouroboros virus was Wesker's endgame. Albert Wesker spent years developing the Ouroboros virus, intended to create a new race of superior beings with himself as God King. Only those with compatible genetics could bond with Ouroboros. Incompatible hosts mutated into massive tentacled monsters. Wesker's plan in RE5 involved releasing Ouroboros globally, killing most of humanity while transforming the worthy few. His god complex reached its apex before Chris and Sheva stopped him. The C virus combined G and T Veronica. The C virus in Resident Evil 6 was created by combining the G virus with the T Veronica strain. This combination created Javo, infected humans who retained intelligence and could mutate specific body parts in response to damage. The C virus also created chrysalids, cocoons that birthed various creature types. It represented the culmination of decades of bioweapon research, combining the worst elements of previous viruses. The molded store genetic information. The mold in RE7 and RE8 is fundamentally different from viruses. It's a fungal network that stores genetic information and consciousness within the megamycete, creating a biological archive. This is why Eveline could appear as different ages, why Ethan's wounds healed perfectly, and why Rose inherited abilities. The mold preserves and transmits information across hosts. It's less a weapon and more an alien form of life. The Cadou parasite system. Mother Miranda's Cadou parasites in Resident Evil Village are derived from the megamycete. Each recipient reacts differently. Lady Dimitrescu gained vampiric traits. Moreau became aquatic and deformed. Donna developed hallucinogenic spore production. Heisenberg gained electromagnetic manipulation. The Cadou seeks compatibility with its host, mutating them based on their mental state and physical structure. Most recipients fail and become lichens. The BSAA's controversial evolution. The Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, founded by Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, and others, started as a force for good. By Resident Evil Village, however, the organization had become corrupted, using bioweapons themselves. Chris, discovering BSAA was deploying BOW soldiers, set up future conflicts, suggesting the organization he helped create had become what it was meant to destroy. Blue Umbrella's redemption arc. After the original Umbrella Corporation collapsed, it was reformed as Blue Umbrella, claiming to work toward redemption by fighting bioterrorism. Chris Redfield reluctantly worked with them in Resident Evil 7, though he remained suspicious. Blue Umbrella provided equipment and support for cleanup operations, attempting to repair the damage their predecessor caused. Whether this redemption is genuine remains a serious question. The Connections created Eveline. The shadowy organization called the Connections created Eveline as part of an illegal bioweapons program. They intended to sell her to the highest bidder, but she escaped during transport, leading to the Baker incident. Lucas Baker secretly worked for the Connections, providing data on Eveline's capabilities. The organization remains active in the series' present timeline, suggesting future threats. Resident Evil's theme of corporate evil. Throughout the series, the true horror isn't just monsters. It's the corporations that created them. Umbrella, Tricell, the Connections, and even the BSAA's eventual corruption all demonstrate how unchecked power and profit motive lead to atrocities. Resident Evil consistently shows that the real monsters are the people in suits making decisions in boardrooms, valuing profit and progress over human life. The viruses and creatures are symptoms. Corporate greed is the disease.